In this video, I just want to take a few minutes to explore the differences between server-side routing and client-side routing. Server-side routing is the more traditional approach where we define the routes on the server. Client-side routing is the more modern approach where we use client-side JavaScript to dynamically change what gets shown to the screen. Client-side routing has been made popular by all sorts of tools: Angular, Backbone, Ember, Vue, React. They all use client-side routing. The implementation is different, obviously. They all have their own way of doing things, but at the core, they all work the same. So what we're going to do is explore at a high level the differences between the two. The tool that we'll be using is React Router, but that's not important for now. So let's bring the browser into the mix and talk about what happens in a traditional server-side routing situation. For this example, let's say that I'm either entering a URL in for the first time or I'm changing pages. Maybe I click a link in the nav to switch from the accounts page to the profile page. So what exactly happens? Well, step one, the browser detects that change. It sees the URL changed, and it knows that in order to render the correct thing for that URL, it needs to communicate with the server. So the browser makes an HTTP request off to the server responds with the HTML that should get shown, and then the browser goes ahead and re-renders things. It completely removes whatever is shown in the browser, and it completely replaces it with the new HTML that's coming back. Now, this process is expensive. Making the HTTP request and waiting for the response takes time. We're not just using computational power, we're now introducing the network. So the network, latency, all of that stuff is going to come into play, and it's going to cause a small delay before the browser can actually re-render things. What we're going to be focusing on is using client-side routing. So with client-side routing, we handle the re-rendering of our application on the client using client-side JavaScript. Now, the very first time we load the application, we do still have to go off to the server. We have to say, hey, I want this app. The server is going to respond with the HTML, and then our client-side JavaScript is going to start rendering the React app. But for every other page change, whether the user clicks a link switching pages or whether they get redirected based off some action they took, we're going to be handling that with client-side JavaScript, which means we do not need to make the round trip to the server in order to re-render the page. Instead, we're going to be using the HTML5 history API available by browsers. That allows us to watch for URL changes and run some JavaScript code when the URL actually does change. It also allows us to say, hey, don't go off to the server for this URL. I got this covered for you. Just run this function whenever the URL actually changes. That allows us to do something based off of the change right inside of our client-side JavaScript. What are we going to do? We're just going to render a new component to the screen. Maybe we re-render part of the application, leaving the header in place. Maybe we re-render the entire page. Regardless of what we do, this process no longer requires us to communicate with the server, and it's going to run a whole lot faster. Now, what exactly happens when do something runs? That's not very descriptive. In reality, React Router or any other client-side routing solution, they're going to be going off to your configuration. So in our case with React Router, we're going to have a set of URLs and a set of components to render for those URLs. So for the root of the app, I might have an app component that renders. For /help, I might render the help component, and for about, I would render the about component. So in reality, when the URL changes, we find the matching component, if any, and then we render with a JavaScript function call, something like react-dom.render. So using React Router, we're going to be able to re-render our application on the fly with client-side JavaScript. That's going to allow us to create a single-page application where we just swap out components, simulating the page change. It's important to note that React Router or React, they didn't create client-side routing and they really didn't spearhead or popularize it. This was very popular before React came around. React Router is just a React-based implementation. It takes advantage of the fact that we use JSX, so we'll be using JSX to set up the config. But the big picture stuff and the principles behind client-side routing, other tools have had those for a long time as well. But in this section, what we're going to do is figure out how to set this up with React Router. So let's go ahead and kick things off in the next video where we start building out the brand new project we're going to be working on. Our Expensify project is coming up next, so stay tuned. I'll see you then.